Welcome everyone. It is Thursday, January 14th, and this is the Maximus call-in radio show. I believe this is the sixth, the seventh one that we've been doing every single week on the dot. Thursdays at 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 Eastern, and I'm super excited to have everyone join. And we have a long list of questions actually that people have submitted, and as always, we give priority to folks who want to ask their questions live because I think it makes for more interesting discussion. So, um, why don't we get going, Ishan?
So let's see. Peyton had a really good question, but I'm gonna actually hit him offline. It looks like Diego, you're the first online with a question, or Michael, if either of you would like to chime in.
Diego doesn't mind, I'll go ahead and ask my question.
Please do, Michael.
Yeah, so first off, I just want to thank you and Ishan for hosting these calls every Thursday night. It's been very consistent and I've learned a lot.
Awesome.
My question is regarding testosterone,
Hmm.
and I'm curious. I hear it all the time. Men should think about their testosterone, but I'm not sure what testosterone really is, and why should men be thinking about their testosterone and getting their testosterone levels checked?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's talk a little bit about what it is, why you should get it checked, what normal levels are, and different ways of enhancing it. Um, so, testosterone is essentially the master male hormone. There are many hormones that are part of the endocrine system, but testosterone um, in particular is particularly important because it's one of the masculinizing hormones, right? So when you were literally in utero, when your mom was pregnant with you, the amount of in utero testosterone helps, in fact. Differentiate an embryo and makes them a boy versus a girl. This actually even shows up later in life. The amount of in utero testosterone that you have is phenotypically expressed in what's called the 4D 2D digit ratio, which is essentially the ratio of this finger to this finger. And you can see like this finger of mine is slightly longer than this finger. And the difference between the two is essentially an expression of how much testosterone you were exposed to as an infant, or actually in utero, technically. So, why is that important or useful? Because it basically uh, shows how much testosterone you were exposed to, and actually can be used in like predictive in prediction. So there was actually a great BBC special that was kind of like a battle of the sexes, and this professor went to a track team and measured all of their 2D 4D digit ratios to see who basically had the highest level of testosterone that they were exposed to when they were in the womb, so to speak, and then use that to basically predict who would win a running race. So the guys ran a race, and as predicted, the guy who had the highest 2D, 4D digit ratio, which means they had the greatest amount of exposure to testosterone early on in life, was actually the person who ended up winning the race. So testosterone does matter for things like sports performance very much, because that's why, in fact, you see all the doping scandals and allegations, because people who naturally either have higher levels of testosterone or artificially enhance their testosterone through pharmacological means tend to perform better because it increases muscle mass, decreases body fat, and increases the ability to lift weights, do power sports, sprint. So it's essentially an ergogenic aid. So that's one of the reasons that it's important is it enhances performance, especially on an athletic level. Aesthetically, obviously, it has effects not only in terms of, as I mentioned, increasing muscle mass and decreasing fat mass, but those are what are called the anabolic sort of effects of testosterone. Testosterone does break down into a molecule called DHT, which is more androgenic, and androgenic is like literally the more masculinizing thing. So, like DHT lets you grow a beard. For instance, it makes your voice deeper. And so all the effects that you associate with the onset of puberty, for instance, or sort of phenotypic expressions like body hair, chest hair, beard hair that are associated with essentially being male and makes us sexually dimorphic from females, meaning we look different than females. It's responsible for. So that's kind of on a physiological level. And then there's some interesting psychological or psychiatric effects of testosterone as well. When testosterone levels are higher, people do have a self-reported greater sense of confidence, drive, energy levels, and almost like a sense of dominance, right? So the interesting thing about it, though, is it doesn't necessarily make one like the stereotype of a knuckle dragging Neanderthal that's super aggressive and wants to start a fight at any particular moment. In fact, there's really interesting research in which they gave men testosterone replacement therapy. So this is external testosterone that was injected into the body. And interestingly, it actually improved their mood. So they were often actually friendlier, calmer, lesser self-reported symptoms of anxiety and depression. So it kind of actually makes sense where if you think that testosterone is essentially a biomarker that may be a proxy for where you lie in sort of the social dominance hierarchy, where higher testosterone males tend to, because perhaps of whether it's being more confident or looking or feeling or performing better, tend to achieve more. Um, they tend to be higher on the dominance hierarchy in terms of their power, status, etc. And as a result of that, actually can relax a little bit. Contrary to sort of stereotypical notions, I think it's actually mood regulating when testosterone levels are at least normal, if not high. So that's the other reason that I think it's powerful is hormones are different than, let's say, neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters being things like serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, etc. Um, in that they have kind of very profound effects in mind and body. I think it's a very powerful hormone in a lot of ways. Now, to the point of like why should it matter to you and why should you measure it? It's not routine to test for testosterone. Like if you go and get your annual physical, for instance, sometimes they may do blood work, sometimes they may do not. It's usually like a CMP or CBC that they're doing, which is just like measuring standard things like your blood glucose levels, but they don't generally measure testosterone. I actually think it's a shame that they don't because it's actually increasingly a problem on three different levels. So, one, there's a generational effect that we're seeing where testosterone levels are decreasing 1% per year, right? So, a guy in 1980 had 40% higher testosterone levels than a similarly aged guy in 2020, and we're not 100% sure why this is. It may be a number of factors, obesity, smoking, but also potentially these endocrine disrupting chemicals. Everything that we use is plastic from, or has, whether it's plastic microbeads and toothpaste, toothbrushes, all of our food is stored in plastic. And these may be sort of trickling into our system, including all the cosmetic soaps, all kinds of stuff that we use, and maybe disrupting our endocrine system much more than in previous generations where people kind of used um, less ultra processed stuff, less ultra processed food, etc. So generationally, testosterone is going down. Second, it does also go down with age. So you as an individual, about over the age of 30, your testosterone levels will typically go down on average 1% per year. So you can almost imagine basically every single decade as you age as an adult, it's going down by about 10%. Now, again, that's an average. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to happen to you. One of the biggest factors, of course, that contributes to that is obesity. So at the same time, people are gaining about a pound per year as an adult as well. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that as you're gaining weight, your testosterone levels are going down as well. Because we know that sort of central adiposity or extra body fat that we carry, particularly around our stomach, has a lot of an enzyme called aromatase, which breaks testosterone down into estradiol, and thus may be contributing to the drop that we see in testosterone. We do know, though, that in healthy adult males, if you are able to not gain weight as an adult, you can keep your testosterone levels actually pretty stable over time. And in fact, there's like interesting evidence from Olympic athletes back in the 60s and 70s who had their testosterone levels measured back then and maintained a very obviously healthy lifestyle as they aged into their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Were actually able to maintain very high levels of testosterone, even higher levels than healthy young men in their 20s and 30s who are Olympic athletes. So um, it's the other thing to kind of be aware of, and obviously it just highlights how important lifestyle is to kind of almost your if this is the trend, it's going down 1% a year. Your job as a man, in my opinion, is to alleviate that trend and make sure it's as flat as possible, or at least the decline is as slow as possible by really taking care of yourself. But the third reason is there is some just individual variability in testosterone levels. Now, whether that's because of just genetics, whether that's because maybe you're maintaining a healthy lifestyle, but who knows? You're exposed to these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and you're not even aware of how much exposure that you're getting, or maybe due to lifestyle factors. Let's say you're getting 6 hours of sleep, and that may be affecting you more than other people because you really need, let's say, 8 to 9 hours of sleep just based on your kind of physiological makeup. So you may be low testosterone or at least non-optimal testosterone. You have no idea. So I generally encourage people to ask their primary care physician if they have a good relationship for it with them for to get tested in terms of their testosterone levels. Most doctors, unfortunately, will say unless you have a good reason or you're symptomatic or you're showing some sort of symptoms, they won't do it because insurance companies need to have a justification to pay for it. I think it's a bit of a shame. I think it's why it's important to have a good relationship. You can say, "Hey, look, I just want to make sure that I'm not having a problem." Or if you are experiencing some symptoms like fatigue, etc., you can say, "Hey, I just want to make sure it's not because of this issue." And there's other issues, other hormones that are important as well. So, for instance, if I see patients in my private practice. If I see someone who's like super, super anxious and it's not like concomitant with sort of their thoughts, right? They're not worried about a lot of stuff, but they're just experiencing a lot of physiological anxiety and it's all the time. I'd be like, go get your thyroid levels checked because you might be hyperthyroid. There may be something physiological going on that's not even psychological. So you want to almost just cover your bases. So I think on those three levels, it's very useful to know what your testosterone levels are. Is making sure that like because of the generational bracket that you're in, that you're not sort of low. Two, depending on your age, that you're not just having low levels because of your age or your lifestyle. And then three, just making sure you on an individual basis, because of your lifestyle and your health behaviors or your exposure to chemicals, don't have low testosterone. I think for all three of those reasons, it's very useful to go get your levels measured. Now, there's a tricky issue of what is low, right? Every depending on the type of test that you do, there's a different reference range. Generally speaking, I would say like a normal range, if you're talking about total testosterone, if it's measured in, I believe it's nanograms per milliliter or deciliter, is usually between 300 and 900. I would say you're not really considered to have clinically low testosterone unless you're below 267, 300, depending on the lab reference range. But just because you're not, that includes like 95% of men between that 300 and 900. But just because you're not like in that bottom, 2.5%, doesn't mean that your levels are optimal. So if you had a level of 301, the test would come back and say normal. But normal is like you're literally in the third percentile, and 97% of men are higher than you. So now an insurance company would be like, "You're normal. I'm not going to pay for any treatment." But if you're trying to be the best man that you can be and be optimal and be competitive in a hyper competitive society, I would say third percentile is not particularly great. And you might want to try to figure out what's contributing to that. Obviously, it's useful to review all your health behaviors and make sure it's not because of sleep deprivation, your diet, lack of sun exposure, lots of other factors. But there are sort of other things that you can do to make sure that your levels are high. So obviously, just do a quick review of the five foundational health behaviors. Make sure you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Obviously, fundamental. There's clear research that shows there's an associational increase in testosterone levels up to 8 hours of sleep. So literally, the more sleep you get, the higher your testosterone levels, up to about 8 hours. We're not sure if 9 or 10. Unfortunately, they didn't look at that question. Increases levels, but I would say just based on common sense and the linear trend, if you're doing a lot of physical activity and you're getting 9 hours of sleep, it's probably better anyway. And it's sort of an anti-inflammatory diet is associated with better testosterone levels. Obviously, the more ultra-processed food that you're eating is very inflammatory and probably exposes you more to those endocrine disrupting chemicals that I mentioned. So you really want to get your diet under control. Fat is not bad. In fact, you want to be consuming some saturated fat because saturated fat is essentially or cholesterol, for instance, is literally the precursor or the biological substrate for your body to produce its own testosterone. So eating things like fatty fish, egg yolks, dairy in moderation is useful to making sure that your body can produce enough of its own testosterone. So we talked about diet, we talked about exercise. um, you want to obviously make sure that your stress is managed. Stress, as I mentioned in one of the previous podcasts, is associated with its own hormone, which is cortisol. And if your cortisol levels are high, it's catabolic. Catabolic is literally the opposite of anabolic, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast. And it almost antagonizes testosterone, and that if your cortisol levels are high, your testosterone levels decrease. And so you want to make sure that your stress levels are under control. So that's obviously beneficial from using exercise, using mindfulness, for instance, as an intervention to help calm down, especially in the evenings, is particularly critical. Testosterone levels are affected by intimacy as well. So physical touch, if you are in a relationship, intimacy does increase and stimulate testosterone levels. If you're obviously around an attractive woman that you're sexually active with, that increases testosterone levels as well. Um, there's been a lot of questions about, does excessive masturbation mess with testosterone levels? It's unclear. The problem is, like, these studies are all on a short time scale. Like, if you abstain from masturbation for 5 days, does testosterone and growth hormone go up? Yes, temporarily. But it's unclear if you keep on doing that and doing sort of quote unquote no fap, as they like to call it, if it will as well. I don't necessarily agree with these crazy bro science guys on Twitter who are like, don't masturbate ever. Do semen retention, which is not a scientific practice at all. In fact, there's good research that shows that orgasming as a male at least once a week is probably healthy for your prostate in terms of producing and releasing seminal fluid and things like that. Now, obviously, if you're going nuts and you're like masturbating 3 to 5 times a day because you have a pornography addiction, you should probably address that. It's unclear what the effects are on testosterone, but I think just for your general mental health and well-being, you should address that. So, if you do notice that your testosterone levels are suboptimal, then make sure you really focus on addressing these lifestyle um, or these health behaviors that I mentioned, because it'll significantly increase your levels. And if you want help doing that, that's obviously what we're doing here on Discord. We have the accountability groups, and a lot of people are working on their New Year's resolutions, not just to increase their testosterone levels, but just to be a better, healthier man in general. The nice thing is these things kind of go hand in hand. So the way that I would kind of put it is, you should think about testosterone as almost like the canary in the coal mine, or as I like to call it, like the check engine light for men. In that, if you're doing everything right, you're eating well, you're sleeping, you're sleeping right, you're managing your stress, you're having meaningful, intimate relationships, you're maintaining good focus, you're dopamine fasting, you're not going nuts on internet, social media, gaming, etc. Then your testosterone levels should naturally be good. And so you can almost take it as like the one number that's kind of telling you, along with actually your ability to like, have regular healthy erections. Those are two kind of, useful check engine lights to make sure that you're healthy as a man. Because if you think about it, if our one sort of biological purpose is to reproduce, you want your testosterone levels to be high, because testosterone is essentially correlated with the ability to produce sperm. It's promoted by a hormone called LH, or luteinizing hormone, which increases testosterone, but it also increases basically sperm count. And then obviously the ability to maintain an erection is obviously necessary for successful, a sexual encounter and copulation. So those are two useful things to kind of pay attention to. And if you notice that's changing over time, right? Like you're measuring your testosterone levels, let's say every 6 to 12 months, you notice it dropping. It's like, oh, okay, there's something kind of going off here. Or same thing, if you're losing your ability to maintain your erections, then that's a useful sort of check engine light of like, okay, there's something going on here. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's sleep, maybe it's something else. Make sure to address those things. So that's why I think it matters a lot. And then there are ways of increasing testosterone on the sort of pharmacological side of things. The first thing I think is really important is actually another hormone, which is vitamin D. So there is associational or correlational data that shows that vitamin D is essentially correlated with testosterone. Now we don't know because I haven't seen a lot of like randomized clinical trials. There have been some trials. I would say the evidence is mixed, but people, men in particular, who have vitamin D levels between 80 and 100 nanograms per, I believe it's deciliters, have the highest testosterone levels. That's actually way higher than most people have. Generally, like if you're below 20 to 30, you're vitamin D deficient. If you're about 50, you're considered like in a good zone, but actually 80 to 100, which is rare, is really considered optimal, and maybe optimal, in fact, for uh, testosterone levels. So, making sure obviously you're getting enough sunlight without burning your skin, obviously, or taking supplemental vitamin D may help you get up to your natural physiological baseline levels of testosterone. And then there are actually pharmacological, like prescription pharmaceutical ways of increasing testosterone as well naturally. We'll save that for future podcasts. I think there's some really, really interesting stuff coming through the pipeline that can essentially stimulate your body's own natural production of testosterone in a way that's pretty safe and pretty effective. But we'll talk more about that in a later show.
Appreciate that answer, Cam. Um, Real quick follow-up question though.
Hmm.
Is soy an endocrine disrupting chemical? I hear a lot of people say avoid soy. Is that a real thing? Is that scientifically specified to avoid soy?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask any pharmacologists, they always say this mantra of the dose is the poison. So the question is always how much, right? And if you have I don't know, like a handful of edamame or like soybeans, when you're going out to eat some Japanese food, or a little bit of tofu, or soy milk every once in a while, is it probably harmful to you? Probably not, I would say. However, like that's why I say the dose is the poison. There was actually an interesting case study, which was published. You can actually go and find it on PubMed, of a guy who was drinking, I think, 3 quarts of soy milk a day. Now, obviously, it's a lot of soy milk, but I don't know. Maybe the guy really liked it or something. It was his milk substitute, but he actually literally started developing breasts and developing breast tissue, because it may be sort of functioning as an estrogen receptor agonist and binding to the same receptor that estrogen does. Because soy does have sort of what are called phytoestrogens, or plant based estrogens, that mimic the estrogen that your body naturally produces. So I would say, is soy harmful? In low doses? Probably not. But in high doses, there's, at least on the basis of small case studies, enough that makes me concerned that you probably shouldn't be guzzling soy milk all the time. I'm actually not a fan of all these fake milk alternatives. I don't get it at all. Milk is not unhealthy. It doesn't even, it defies sort of logic. Every single person who's listening to this call and radio show spent the first year or two of their life literally raised on milk, right? It is the mammal food. And the cow milk, while slightly different than human milk, is close enough that it's not a terrible thing. Now, obviously, it's kind of a growth agent, right? It's supposed to make babies bigger. So, do you need it in adulthood? No, I don't think you need dairy, but it does contribute positively. Provides protein, calcium, and other interesting nutrients. If you are lactose intolerant, what I would suggest is to find a lactose-free version. My favorite brand actually is Fairlife. It's ironically owned by Coca-Cola. So despite the shit sugar sweetened beverages they put out, this is actually healthy. It's essentially ultra filtered milk. They don't modify it in any way. They just filter the milk So it lowers the carbohydrates, increases the protein, and it removes the lactose. So I think it's like 99.9% lactose free. So people who are lactose intolerant can actually enjoy milk. It's a little thicker as a result of the ultrafiltration, but it's tasty. It tastes like normal milk. And I think it comes in like skim 1%, full fat varieties as well. Make sure you buy the on they do have sweetened varieties that are like chocolate milk and stuff. Don't buy that. Just buy the regular Fairlife if you're gonna have it. Um, or otherwise just drink milk. I'm personally more of a fan of fermented dairy if you're going to have dairy, meaning Greek yogurt, skyr, kefir. There's studies that show that actually dairy consumption associationally is lower associated with lower rates of type 2 diabetes, and that effect is even more true for fermented dairy. So I personally don't drink milk. I guess I will every once in a while, but it's not a regular thing. But I do consume yogurt, and I do think that's a healthy thing, particularly the strained yogurts that are lower in carbohydrates.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Pleasure.
So up next, Hitman, if you're online.
Yeah, so my question was, do you think that behavior change has gotten harder since being inside in COVID? And I'm sure that's probably more on the yes side, but I guess like if you can expand on that and talk about how people can really get the energy to do a lot of the stuff they want to do, because I think a lot of it comes down to implementation. Things are a lot
Sure.
easier when you're going out to the office and then go to the gym right afterwards and kind of just feed off a lot of the energy of just being outside. And now, even if you have all the information, I'm supposed to sleep this much, I'm supposed to work out, you have all the things you need, it's still really difficult after a long day of work to really go do that if you've been inside all day. Especially with the nature of like many of our jobs of being inside a lot
Sure.
often. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, if I had to guess, it's probably net harder for most people to do behavior change. But here's the thing. I was actually thinking about this past week and talking about sort of the error of the average. I don't think on like for a lot of things on an individual level, what is true for the average is necessarily useful for you as an individual, right? So even if for most people it's harder, it may not be if you set up your life correctly. And I'll give you a real example of this. There was an op-ed recently actually about the importance of vitamin D for preventing and treating coronavirus. I actually reached out to one of the authors, who's a physician who, like me, actually runs a company. And I was talking to him, and I was like, "Man, how do you find the time to write like scientific articles about vitamin D while running a company?" Because I published a bunch too, but I'm not publishing anything right now. I'm just like too busy doing many other things. And he was like, "You know how?" He's like, "I cut down on 10 to 12 hours of commute time thanks to the quarantine. And now I use that time that I used to be would be commuting in order to publish research." And so I was like, "See, that's a great example of the exception. For most people, I think the levels of stress and isolation and loneliness has gotten to them and made behavior change harder. For this guy, he's like, oh, great. I'm not commuting. How can I use that time to do the things that I've been wanting to do?" And then obviously he's very disciplined about putting that into action. So I think it's a very useful lesson to be learned from that doctor in terms of things that may be disadvantageous to other people can be advantageous to you if you use it wisely. So I think you should like figure out a way to use it to your advantage, quite frankly. So, but to make this kind of real and applicable to you, I know you had messaged over Discord about how you're struggling a little bit with behavior change. So I'd love to hear it, just if you could share with all of our listeners a little bit like what you're dealing with, like what you're struggling with in terms of your fitness or exercise routine. And I'd love to just talk through it, and maybe we can just kind of problem solve together.
Yeah, so I would say beforehand when I would be like in the office or I'd be in school, I'd just go to the gym. I'd have more energy. It would be really easy to do that for me. I didn't have like willpower issues. It was like in my routine.
Hmm.
But now I have like a home gym set up. I have everything like
Great.
pretty much set up, and I can go downstairs and do all the things I need to do. But then once like I'm done with work, uh, just like going downstairs becomes like there's way less energy than I had before. Like even though my schedules were busier, I
Right.
was able to do more stuff on the side with full time work or full time school. And now I have more time on my hands with way less
Hmm.
energy, and that's the trade off that I've gotten.
Well,
Or
I think it's a great point, but I think you're basically starting to point us in the right direction, which is it sounds like it's not a time issue for you. It's really an energy issue, right? For you in terms that you're not finding the sufficient amount of energy or willpower to go and do, the things that you needed to do. So let's dissect that a little bit. Back when, let's say pre quarantine, pre COVID, when you were able to effectively exercise despite having less time, what were you doing? Like what time were you working out? Where were you working out? What actually worked for you?
Yeah, it was right after work. I just go to the gym. It was like a 10-minute walk from work. It was
Mhm.
kind of baked into the routine.
Mm.
And yeah, it would be at a gym. It would be strength lifting. And it was pretty standard. I have energy for cardio and everything. Yeah,
What time would you typically get off work?
5:30.
Okay.
Uh, yeah,
So you get off work at 5:30, you take a 10-minute walk, so 5:40 you're kind of going to the gym. And then what were you doing at the gym? What was your typical workout or routine?
yeah. So I'm usually running or doing first some mobility and then 20 minutes of like cardio, usually like at intervals. And then
Mhm.
after that, it's strength training. So it'd be like push, pull, or legs that day. So pretty standard, and then
Yep.
abs afterward if I had the time,
And then how
or if I
long
wanted to. Yeah,
how long would you spend at the gym?
it would be around 2 hours, like 1 hour to 1 hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours, because like I'd be stretching, then working, running. There'd be like kind of breaks in between, and then yeah, it would take some time by the time I got out. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sauna, I have a sauna as well usually, so yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of time. Now some of it may not be workout time if you're talking about sauna and things like that, or just like
Yeah,
pure
yeah,
stretching. How much of that time would you say was actually working out? Like at least an hour?
yeah, at least 1 hour.
Okay. So let's compare that to what you're facing now. So now you're obviously working from home like most of us. What time are you getting off work now?
6:30, because the time zones have changed, so it's usually later.
Okay. So that's obviously a difference is it's a little bit later. And then how are you feeling at sort of 6:30 when the thought starts crossing through your mind about, oh, okay, done with work, time to work out now.
Yeah, it's usually, yeah, I think at that point I'm just not, I just don't get ready, or I don't get set up to go downstairs. I usually just look at email or some other work related thing, or another side project thing, or something else. Usually, or like read up something.
Makes sense. Is it possible to end work at 5:30 or because of those meetings you have to stay an hour later?
I can do it earlier on 5:30, but like sometimes things come up, or yeah, usually I keep it to 6:30 just because I can get either more work done, or like there might be something that came up in the middle of the day and I wanted to get more done that day.
Is
So I
it
can do 5:30 as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is that extra it's the hour, is it like, is it meetings that you can't move, or is it just like work that you need to do, you could do at like, whatever, 7, 8, 9 o'clock?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's meetings, but usually I can be really flexible. So
Okay. So, and then, have you worked out at your home gym during quarantine? And are you doing the same workout that you used to do, like the hour and a half, 2 hour kind of thing?
yeah, I've been doing, well. I don't do the cardio as much anymore. I kind of just walk, and then I've actually took out some of the stuff from the routine, because
Hmm.
I've been getting into back into it. So it would be around the same, pretty much the same exercises, except like less volume or less machines.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a couple things that come to mind. Is if you're finding it's an energy issue, then we have to address that. So you obviously kind of probably can guess where I'm going in that. If you find that your energy levels are declining, which they can actually pretty rapidly, I would say in the evening, like there is kind of a big difference between 5:30, 6:30, 7:30 for people. If you're depending on sort of your circadian rhythm, are you more of a morning person or an evening person? Night person.
Yeah, so for working out, it's definitely evenings. When I work out in the morning, I usually get really tired for the rest of the day. So evening person for lifting, for working out.
But what about, exercise aside? Like, are you a morning person? Like, do you get up early?
Yeah, more. I'm a morning person. I get like most of my stuff done in the morning.
Okay. So that may be interesting in that so if you're more of a morning person in that you have probably a shorter circadian rhythm, you naturally get more tired in the evenings, right? And you probably go to sleep earlier as a result of that. Now, it's probably better for if you're talking about from an exercise performance standpoint to work out in the evenings because ironically, going back to question number one, your testosterone and growth hormone levels are higher in the evening. And so, if you're trying to set a record in terms of how much you lift, it's better to do in the evening rather than the morning. But what may be happening, speculating here, is that if you're a morning person but you're working out in the evening, it may be harder for you in the sense that your natural energy levels may be lower in the evening, and now that you pushed it even 1 hour later, you may be just like really tired. So obviously, the natural solution to that is if you have flexibility with your work and you can work out a little bit earlier, at let's say 5:30 instead of 6:30, and then do that extra hour of work, after you work out, then you might want to experiment with that and see if it helps. The other reason the energy levels may be dropping is because of your meal timing. Like, what time are you eating lunch and dinner?
Yeah, so I've been eating lunch at 2 p.m., which is like the Pacific Standard Time lunch,
Hmm.
because I'm in Central Time, and
Yep.
then dinner a lot later as well.
After you work out.
Yeah, usually around 7 and sometimes even 8.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, so I mean, that may be contributing as well, right? So the difference between eating at 2 o'clock, let's say you're done at 2:30, and then you go work out at 5 o'clock, is there's 3 hours between your last meal and working out. So at that point, you mostly have digested most of your food, depending obviously on the type of food that you're eating. But even that extra hour of like from 2:30, now it's 6:30, and you haven't eaten for 4 hours, your blood sugar levels may be dropping. There's an association based on at least some experimental studies that lower blood sugar levels are associated with willpower. It's probably a controversial finding, but probably directionally true. But yeah, energy levels do drop. So another way you could alleviate that if you don't want to switch your workout time, or you might want to do it in conjunction with doing a workout time, is you may want to have like a mid-afternoon snack or like a pre-workout. Do you ever do like a pre-workout shake?
Yeah, I actually remember I used to eat a lot more protein bars before my workout, or like a one or two, one usually. And I haven't done that anymore. So I guess, yeah, I don't actually take that many snack breaks. I've just been sticking to meals.
Yeah, and not that I'm advocating snacking. And by the way, I don't like protein bars for the most part. Like 99% of them are junk, or even the low carb ones are just so full of weird fibers that I'm not sure they're great. But um, you may want to experiment with like either let's say between somewhere halfway between your lunchtime and your exercise time, you could have a proper snack like handful of nuts, an ounce of cheese, two hard boiled eggs, like healthy kind of snacks. You could do that as like a small meal or a small snack, or you could have a pre-workout shake, which I generally recommend 20 to 30 grams of like a whey protein isolate, 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate. Obviously, consult with your physician. But providing a little bit of nutrition for yourself may alleviate your energy levels. I am not a fan of fasted cardio or fasted exercise. In fact, there was just a study that came out that showed that it wasn't particularly effective. In fact, because there's this notion that if you work out and do cardio fasted, it burns more fat. I don't think that's necessarily true based on the latest findings. You don't obviously want a full stomach because all the blood will concentrate on your GI system, and you want your blood flow to be in your muscles. So you don't want to obviously have a big meal right before you work out. But I would say maybe like 2 hours before an exercise, having a small meal may not be a bad idea, or 20 to 30 minutes before a workout, if it's a fast digesting whey protein isolate, can give you the sufficient energy to do your workout. So I actually would highly recommend instead of a protein bar, by the way, just buy some. Amazon actually has a great brand of grass fed whey protein isolate. Take a scoop of that before your workout, along with some creatine, assuming you have healthy kidney function, is really solid. The other thing, if you unless you're trying to do like a super low carb kind of diet, um, like a tablespoon of high quality honey right before a workout as part of that shake can be helpful in that carbohydrates obviously do give you energy, especially if you're doing lifting. Not necessary, but a lot of people, even who do keto, find it beneficial because keto is probably not optimal for lifting in terms of energy levels. I found myself dragging when I was doing really strict keto. And so I do what's called a TKD, targeted ketogenic diet, where you try to consume your carbs either right before or right after your meals. I preferred it right before because like that 15 grams of glucose, fructose, and sucrose that comes with honey can get increase your energy levels to kind of especially get through a longer workout, especially if you're doing an hour. Speaking of which, so we've talked a little bit about timing of the workout. We talked a little bit about optimizing your nutrition in order to have the sufficient energy for your workout. But the last thing, let's talk about the behavioral side of things, which is you may be creating too high of a bar for you to exercise. If I was exhausted at 6:30 and I knew I had to do a 2 hour, hour and a half, even an hour workout, and I'm tired, of course you're gonna skip it, right? Because it's a very onerous, exhausting kind of thing. So there's sort of two principles that I think might be really useful is especially if you have a home gym, you may want to really focus on being ultra efficient in your workouts. Now, if you used to go to a in-person gym, it's sometimes people don't like being ultra efficient because it's like, I got to drive all the way here. I might as well do everything that I want to do and do like, yeah, like you said, take advantage of the sauna that's there, take advantage of certain equipment that's there. But if you have a gym that's literally at home, you can work out all the time. You might want to really focus on actually toning down your workouts and being a lot more efficient with them. So I would actually suggest you can get a pretty good lifting workout in 30 to 45 minutes and get uh you know 10, even 20 sets, depending on your rest breaks in. So the only way to do that though is to really focus on lifting. I would actually suggest maybe you want to split up your cardio and your weights. I'm actually not a fan of doing cardio and weights together because I think the principle goes, you can either work out long or you can work out hard, but you can't really do both. And it kind of exhausts people unless you're a professional athlete or bodybuilder and you're trying to do it for recomposition purposes. I wouldn't mix the two. What I would suggest is if you're going to do some quote unquote cardio, jog 5 minutes on the treadmill, do a little bit of mobility stuff to get warmed up, and then just go lift. But you don't need to do 20, 30 minutes of running or biking or whatever it is that you're doing. Do those on separate days. Do those really intensely. Do like a HIIT workout, as we talked about in the previous podcast. But I wouldn't sort of mix the workouts together. That way, you can keep it to like 30 or 45 minutes. And by doing so, it's not as intimidating, right? To sort of like your subconscious mind is thinking, I can get through 30 minutes of like a workout versus shit, I got to do 90 minutes of a workout. I don't really feel like it today. So I would say, yeah, maybe think about cutting down your workouts. And then last and final note is you want to be able to be flexible and adjust your workouts on a day by day basis. And I think this is the part that people really miss and underappreciate is you have to listen to your body. Now, that doesn't mean listen to your mind because your mind will give you all kinds of excuses not to work out, but you want to listen to your body because yeah, you just may legitimately be have lower energy, right? So on days I get an 8, 9 hours of sleep, I'm feeling fantastic. And I'm like, let me just go crush, a PR today at the gym. But if I get 6, 7 hours, I'm functional. I'll get through my day at work, but I'm not feeling like, oh, record setting day when I'm lifting today. I'm like, let me just get through this workout, and just do the bare minimum. So on days that you're feeling especially tired, the recommendation I tell this to all of my clients is figure out what the bare minimum is that will get you into the gym, even if it's the home gym that day. So it's almost like you're having like a compromise. It's like negotiating with the parts of yourself, right? So imagine it's 6:30 tomorrow, right? You're feeling tired as usual, but hopefully less tired because maybe it's you've decided to do it at 5:30. You've done your pre-workout shake and some things to alleviate it, and you're like, okay, I'm only going to work out for 30 to 45 minutes, as Dr. Cam said. Even then, if you're finding yourself too intimidated or too averse to kind of doing that, ask yourself, literally ask the parts of yourself, what is the amount that you would be willing to do? And a part of you might be like, I don't feel like working out for 30 minutes, but could I do 20? Could I do 10? Is it 5 minutes? Is that all I'm willing to do? Find out what the minimum is because there's always a minimum. And maybe the minimum is literally putting on your shoes, going downstairs, and doing a pull up or a one push up. There's always a minimum. But the idea is you never ever skip the workout. So you don't give your brain the chance to avoid the workout. All you're doing is you just compromise to say what's the bare minimum, right? And so if it's 5 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, you have to accept that as essentially what those parts of you are willing to do on that day based on your energy levels. Now, here's the trick. Now, the thing is, you can't lie to yourself about it, right? Let's say you kind of thought about it and you're like, I'm only gonna do 10 minutes, but I don't feel like doing a night whatever the usual hour and a half, 2 hour workouts. So you go there, you do your 10-minute workout. At the end of the 10 minutes, you have permission to go back upstairs and move on with your life. But if 10 minutes into it, at the end of that, you're like, I'm feeling okay and I could do another 5, I can do another 10, then great. It's like you call an audible and you renegotiate essentially the terms with yourself and say, "Okay, I know we set a 10-minute workout, but I'm feeling pretty good. Do you feel good about this too? Great, let's do another 10 minutes." And so you end up doing really a 20-minute workout. And the principle, of course, behind that is the hardest part is obviously getting started. It's overcoming the inertia. Most people, once they're warmed up, they're in the gym, they got the weights in their hands, they're like, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, right? So you can get over it. On the other hand, if you're really just exhausted after those 10 minutes and you're just having a shitty day, fine, call it a day and go back upstairs because at least you compromised with yourself and did the bare minimum that you decided was necessary and sufficient for that day, which is 10 minutes. Then congratulate yourself and say, okay, maybe you'll be better tomorrow. I might have gotten more sleep. I may be feeling emotionally better. That's fine. So that's the important thing is I really think people underappreciate this principle of like you got to compromise with yourself and listen to your body and sort of the different parts of you that may not be willing to do an hour and a half, 2 hour workout every day. I don't think most people, unless they're super motivated or it's become, like you said, a routine like it was back in the day, are willing to do that. So really try to apply that principle and never skip a day. So how many days a week are you trying to work out?
4 to 5.
Great. So 4 to 5, it's like Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday. Make it your goal in this next week that you're going to go every single one of those days that you said, those 4 to 5 days. But you're going to compromise, right? So one day maybe 10 minutes, one day maybe 20 minutes, one maybe 30 minutes. If that's what gets you to do it and never miss a day and continue your streak, then that's what you got to do. But the worst thing is to be a perfectionist and say, I got to do work out for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and the Monday you do your hour and a half, Tuesday you do zero, right? So the irony, of course, is that by being inconsistent, you only do that twice a week. You end up actually working 30 to 45 minutes on average, right? Because you're averaging an hour and a half and zero. So instead of doing that in a very clunky, inconsistent way, you might as well just like calibrate down to the level that your mind and body are willing and able to do.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate it. This was a lot. So thank you.
For sure. So yeah, I know it's a lot, but I mean, this is kind of an example of some of the things that I would go through with clients as I'm coaching them, right? You got to think holistically about what's your chronotype, what's your circadian rhythm, what's the right time to work out? Am I getting enough nutrients to have enough energy? And then am I also kind of compromising psychologically with the various parts of myself to make sure that I'm willing to, do the workout? And then behaviorally, am I also like cutting down the workouts in a way that are achievable, right? So going forward, like my general principle is you should have about an eight out of 10 or an 80% confidence of you hitting any particular goal. So let us know how it goes. Feel free to check in on our next call and radio show. And I'd love to hear if you actually hit your 4 to 5 days next week.
Yep, 100%. We'll definitely be going today after this call.
Excellent. Do that. And remember to use the accountability groups too. If you want other people to hold you accountable, yeah, make it a goal in our squad. And the other guys in the group will definitely hold you to it.
Awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Up next on our list, it looks like online is Ratish.
Yeah, okay, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Fantastic, fantastic. You said you've already shared so much today, which has, I've started doing a lot of these things, and I started tracking my T. I went back to the doctor, got all my levels for the last 5 years.
Awesome.
And the bizarre part is the GPs are completely clueless about
Totally.
a lot of these things. I mean, it's just anyway, I mean, my B12 levels were really low several years ago.
Mhm.
I had no clue. Now they're really high,
Yeah.
and because I was taking them too much B12, so I'm backing off. But anyway,
Yeah. But
the
by the way, that's really, really common. If you take a multivitamin or a B complex, they put like levels that are way above the RDI or the recommended daily intake. Um, and the reason it's like it's not really dangerous, I would say generally to do so is because it's water. They're water soluble vitamins. You piss most of them out, quite frankly. So it's a very, very common thing that you'll have sort of above normal or super physiological levels of vitamin B12 if you take any sort of supplements. So it's not a rare thing to see that. So don't necessarily get freaked out by it. Obviously, it depends on you and your. I defer to your physician's expertise, but it's not unusual.
the funny thing is, the physicians are, and I have a fantastic physician, who's really good. He hates writing scripts, but I read that B12, high B12 has been very
Mhm.
mildly correlated with increased cancer because it's a growth hormone.
Yeah, maybe.
It is a very mild association study.
Right.
I'm not putting a whole lot of weight on it, but taking B12 was pretty revelatory for my energy.
Yeah.
So I'm not going off it, but I'll just modulate it down a little bit. Instead of two a day, I'll take one a day.
Yeah, that's smart. And I know a lot of people who do that. Just you want to for the listeners on the call, like sort of B vitamins, B complex vitamins are very helpful for energy. That's why you see them often in like Red Bull and other sort of energy drinks. They like to throw a bunch of B vitamins in with their drinks, along with the caffeine, of course. And it can be helpful, yeah, for energy levels. But yeah, you don't necessarily because supplements are not regulated and the amount that they put in them is varies all across the board. Yeah, I think it's a smart idea what you're doing. Measure your levels and then titrate it to the appropriate amount where you're getting kind of the maximal benefit with the minimal viable dose.
Yeah, yeah. So the question I had, which you touched upon already, was keto and working out. So I started keto in August. So it's been almost exactly 6 months. And the first 2 months were completely, shit, right? Like I felt like crap.
Yeah.
And I couldn't work out, all those things. I did some pretty heavy kettlebell workouts. And now I was able to go back to them, but I feel my appetite going down. And partially to be winter.
Hmm.
Uh, but same time my energy going down too,
Right.
for doing weight workouts. And I just feel my diet is like the amount of calories I'm taking in, the absolute number of calories is going down.
Hmm.
And you spoke a bit about keto and working out. So if you could address that, that would be really, really good. And then one second part was on Twitter, you had mentioned the potassium sodium balance.
Right.
Oh, I think it was potassium sodium, not potassium, not sodium magnesium, right?
Yeah.
Not to be
Potassium's.
equal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So, I mean, part of the reason that keto or ketogenic diets work is that they put people in caloric deficits. So they're
Yes.
they're naturally satiating diets. It's very satisfying. Obviously, you eat a bunch of meat and eggs and things that sort of fit a low carb diet. So when they've done tightly controlled studies and they compare it to standard American diet, part of the reason it works is people eat like 100, 200 calories less per day even when they're not trying to control their calories. It's just that the food is more satisfying, satiating. And so they naturally cut their calories and they obviously lose more weight. There may be something obviously in it's not just the calories, I would say. There may be something unique, obviously, to lowering sort of glycemic response by eating lower carb foods that may help restore insulin sensitivity, which is really important, obviously, if you're sort of on the diabetes or cardiometabolic spectrum. So it's both of those things. It's not just calories. I think it's a combination of the calories and the carbohydrates that make ketogenic diets effective. But it's not unusual to experience what you're reporting in terms of a little bit lower appetite or at least a little bit lower consumption of calories as a result of a ketogenic diet. But I would argue that's kind of why they work. So now keto for athletes is interesting, and we could have a whole show on this. And there's lots of people I recommend like Peter Attia's work. He's done a lot on sort of keto and athletics. I have a general kind of useful rule of thumb is it depends on the kind of sports that you're doing. The gurus in this field are Volek and Finney, who helped found Verta Health. They have two great books, which is the
I watched almost all their videos and
yeah,
read all. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the people who are listening and may not be familiar, it's the art and science of low carbohydrate living, and I think the other one's like the art of science of low carbohydrate performance, and that one's for athletes. Um, it may be a ketogenic diet may be great if you're like a marathon runner, triathlete, or ultra marathoner. It seems that for like these endurance sports where you're doing it for probably more than an hour, for more than a few hours, switching your body from burning carbohydrates to burning fat may be advantageous. So there's a lot of like very successful like ultra marathoners who do kind of low carb, but these guys are running like 24-hour races. It's not like normal, I would say, for most people. If you don't fall into that category and you're like the average guy listening to this, call in radio show, and you're just kind of going to the gym for an hour, you're not really doing endurance high like exercise for the most part. Weightlifting is kind of moderate intensity to begin with, and second, it's kind of moderate intensity interval anyway, because you're not lifting the whole time. You're taking lots of breaks in between sets. Now, there have been studies on keto for looking at it for hypertrophy. It doesn't seem like it negatively impacts hypertrophy, meaning the ability to build muscle is probably equivalent on keto, equivalent-ish, I would say, to any other diet. So I don't think it's necessarily adversely impactful. And there's obviously lots of people who, lift on keto. However, if you look at professional athletes, this has been my argument. There are very, very few professional athletes outside of those doing endurance sports. I know there's some like tennis players who do it, but that like some of their matches are like 3-4 hours, so it does almost start to resemble an endurance sport. If you're talking about sprinters, weightlifters, guys who are doing more like sprint power based things that more resemble like going to the gym, there are very few that are doing strict keto. And the reality is it's probably not optimal for anaerobic exercise where you need to do an intense amount of work in a less than a minute span of time. And I think, quite frankly, if there was an advantage to doing keto, you'd see more athletes doing it. And I just don't think it does confer that benefit. A lot of people anecdotally do report lower energy levels when they do keto. Now that may be because of electrolyte imbalances. Keto does really like throw off people's electrolytes, especially when you do it strictly. It has a diuretic effect, and so when you're flushing out fluids and you're just literally peeing more, you will pee out potassium, sodium, magnesium, calcium more than usual. It can make your levels a little bit wonky, and then obviously throws off your energy levels. So, as a result of that, I would say, keto is probably the best diet for anyone who has diabetes or is on the cardiometabolic spectrum in terms of correcting metabolic syndrome. It's great for that. It's great for weight loss. It's probably one of the best diets, I would argue, for weight loss, and the research literature seems to back that up. Um, and I think it's a great kind of probably a optimally healthy diet, at least a lower carb diet, maybe not keto in particular. But if you're going to do keto and try to lift weights, I would say it's not clear that keto is the optimal diet for hormones. Ironically, I think it was Jeff Volek, one of the low carb godfathers, showed that like carbohydrate intake is actually associated with higher testosterone levels. Ironically, so I'm not sure it's the best diet if you want optimal hormone levels. And in fact, one of the famous Sean Baker doctors, who's the carnivore guy, like showed his testosterone levels, and it was in like the 200s for a guy who's like huge and jacked. He may be sort of a genetically superior specimen, but his hormone levels are totally whack from eating an all meat diet. I don't know if it's from the all meat diet or for something else, but it's certainly not optimal and didn't make me want to emulate an all meat diet after I saw that. So, moral of the story is I like the kind of keto gains philosophy more. There's a whole community called Keto Gains. Luis Villasenor, who's a friend of mine, runs it, and their whole thing is basically doing TKD or CKD, targeted ketogenic diets or cyclical ketogenic diets, which basically means they're consuming carbs like literally like glucose or honey, like I said, right before the workout in order to give them energy in order to lift sufficiently, or you do it one day a week. So like Saturdays, for instance, that's like your refeed day. So you go from a low carb, high fat diet 5-6 days of the week to that 1 to 2 days of the week you're eating the opposite. It's a high carb, low fat diet in order to replenish your glycogen stores and have the sufficient amount of energy in order to lift weights. And also it induces a little bit of metabolic flexibility as well. So I'm more of a fan of TKD, CKD type of ketogenic diets if you're lifting weights. So I think it kind of gets you the best of both worlds.
Got it. Got it. And this is really great, really, really great because when I started doing keto, my biking, I bike a lot and roughly, not Godwin, less than 4 hours a week, 4 to 5 hours a week,
Hmm.
50 miles. And my biking performance just went to the roof
Yeah.
because I could not bike for hours without stopping to ingest fruit. Right?
Right.
Otherwise, every 45 minutes, get off, eat some fruit, right? Eat some fruit. And now I can just go. Just go
Absolutely.
for hours and hours. And so it's really cool that way. But my lifting performance, I could do 100 swings at 53 pounds,
Yep.
20 minutes. Now I can't do that. It's like seems like I'm dying.
Right. So that that's
So,
that's that's a great example of why it's useful as an individual. This is why I was talking, going back to the theme of this podcast, is don't fall into the error of the average. It's okay to self experiment and treat yourself, as a case study of one. Where, as you pointed out, you're like, okay, keto seems to work great for my endurance biking, but it's not optimal for my lifting. So let's start doing some experiments, right? Where I was talking to a buddy of mine, JT, who does the body weight strength stuff, and he found, because he's very active, is doing a lot of strength training, can consume about 100 grams of carbs, which is technically not keto, right? Volek and Finney say it has to be less than 50 grams of total carbs in order to technically be in nutritional ketosis. However, for that individual, he found, because of the amount that he was working out, he could consume up to 100 grams of carbs, measure his blood sugar levels, and he was still, and blood ketone levels, and he was still in ketosis. So you may find that
wow,
actually having a little bit of extra carbs, I would say probably, like, you probably can't have more than 100, but I would say it may be more flexible than people think, where they're always trying to be under
right,
30,
right,
under 50. Maybe for you it's 50, it's 75, it's 100. You can actually have carbs stay in ketosis. So experiment a little bit with, like I said, pre or post workout carbs, and maybe if you want, you can measure your blood sugar, blood ketone levels, and see if it has a negative adverse effect.
yeah, I do measure it roughly 3 times a week, right? So I can do that. What I found with keto though was in my mood levels incredibly stabilized. Um,
Yeah, I think this is a
the
really interesting area that's, like, we just don't know. There's not a lot of psychiatric research on keto, but we know, obviously, it was originally developed for children with epilepsy. Really
right,
interesting emerging evidence in dementia and Alzheimer's may be beneficial for that. But yeah, I think for other, like mood, access one mood disorders, depression, anxiety, it may be helpful. And you certainly heard some anecdotal stuff, whether from you, and I've heard this from some other people. It does have this sort of mood stabilizing effect because your brain preferentially actually prefers ketones over glucose. And for some people, that may help kind of smooth things out. But this is where I think the science is unclear. So I think it's useful to
yeah,
experiment, see how your mood is, track it on a regular basis, and see if it's better.
definitely. Okay, fantastic. Could you briefly touch upon the
Oh,
potassium,
potassium,
sodium,
sodium, yeah.
and
It's interesting. This is where I disagree with Volek and Finney. They look at associational data and find that the lowest mortality rates are around 5 grams of sodium per day. And it's important, because I was saying, because of the diuretic effect on keto.
correct? And that's sodium, not sodium chloride. That's looking at 10 grams of sodium chloride.
Yeah, they're just talking about pure sodium, right? So you got to separate out
Okay,
the chloride. But they're saying, yeah, you should consume 5 grams of sodium a day. I disagree with this because I'm a little bit more in the ancestral paleo camp. If you look at hunter gatherers, they're consuming less than a gram of sodium a day, right? They're not. It's really hard to get salt out in nature. They're not consuming 5 grams. So I think this is where associational epidemiological data is not so great. So I think a general rule of thumb is you should get as much potassium as you get sodium, basically a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's not that you need to limit your salt intake unless you're hypertensive or have high blood pressure. Then yes, maybe you want to pay attention to make sure that it's not elevating your sodium levels. But general rule of thumb is eat salt to taste. Like, make sure your food tastes
right,
decent. But whatever
right.
sodium you're consuming, 2 grams, 3 grams a day, make sure you're also consuming 2 to 3 grams of potassium a day. So it
Got it.
helps counterbalance essentially the effects of sodium. And in fact, there's some argument that's saying it's not just the pure sodium levels or standalone sodium levels that are contributing to hypertension, but it's the imbalance between potassium and sodium. So you may be able to get away with consuming 5 grams of sodium if you're consuming 5 grams of potassium, because they kind of counterbalance each other and regulate one another. So now it's hard to get 5 grams of potassium. You got to like really eat a lot of like avocados, baobab tomatoes, etc. So don't go nuts on the sodium, but I would say at least try to equalize them. The interesting thing is if you look at hunter gatherers, though, they're consuming 7 times, maybe up to 11 times the amount of potassium as they do sodium. Their ratios are way higher than modern sort of humans. So it's hard unless you're eating a very low sodium and you're eating a lot of potassium to achieve anything close to what they're consuming, 5, 7, 11 times the amounts. But that may be, we're not sure, associationally the optimal levels. So I would say maybe if you're really going for optimal, uh, reduce your sodium intake beyond the point which your food just tastes terribly bland. But you don't really need more than a gram of sodium unless you're sweating a lot. That's a different thing. If you're biking for hours a day, you definitely need more sodium because you're sweating it
Okay,
out.
right.
But if you're just a sedentary person like most people and you're doing your 30 minutes in the gym, you're not sweating that much. Uh, you know, uh, uh, don't go nuts on the sodium. Could try to consume as much potassium as possible, and so you're going to have closer to those sort of natural hunter gatherer levels.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We're over time. Had a really interesting call and radio show today. We'll put the episodes up on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, and all the other places that we host it. And if you have more questions, tune in next week, next Thursday, 6 o'clock. Happy to answer them. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful and productive next week.